Well, welcome back. Hopefully you've had a cup of tea or a coffee, taken a deep breath, and we enter part 2 of Who Can Become a Member. So as I said before, this is a chance for us to explore expectations and responsibilities. We had a very lively discussion about who can become a member, and now just want to think about some of those responsibilities and expectations that we think personally, but also ones that are articulated in the Constitution. So, as previously, I'll read what the Constitution says, and it will come up on the screen for those watching on YouTube, and we'll see it. So it says, belonging to the church, the responsibilities of membership normally include attending worship and participating in church activities, personal prayer and Bible study, participation at the communion of the Lord's Supper as a privilege and a priority, helping the church whenever possible by using gifts and abilities to advance the purpose of the church through its activities, attending and participating in church members' meetings, giving regular financial support to the church in proportion to personal resources and circumstances, and upholding Christian values. I will leave it there for now. There's obviously a few footnotes which link to other parts in the Constitution. What do you think? It's very interesting reading these through now, I've got to admit, after the conversation we've just had, because it kind of goes, oh, actually, that's very interesting. So maybe just initial comments before we go on, if you have any that you want to make.
I think firstly it's just important to recognise that however much we may agree or not agree with this particular list of responsibilities, it is a reminder that the church is more than a social club that we join, that we just turn up to, when we're minded to turn up to. And I know we perhaps overuse the language of journey, but these emphasise that through becoming a church member, we are committing to a journey together. At the beginning of that journey, we're not saying that we're perfect and that we've got everything in order, we've got everything right, but we are saying that we are committing to journey together to discover more of Christ and to bring more of Christ to the world. And that involves responsibility. And so to become a church member is to commit ourselves to live out those responsibilities, however we define them.
Yes. And that's really important to mention, and I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think sometimes when I'm talking about some of my views on these things, it can seem that I'm saying, just come to Dove Cafe and Renew Refresh, have a coffee and be a member. That's certainly not for me, as we've mentioned on numerous occasions. Spirituality and faith is a deep commitment to Jesus, and that's lived out in an anomaly of ways. What about yourself, Peter?
Lived out in a...
I don't know what I said there.
Anomaly.
I was just trying to sweep one past as if
it was a really helpful statement, which is why I stopped you.
I don't know if it was.
It was, no, but it's just...
I think I said anomaly of ways.
You said anomaly of ways.
I sometimes have it as diverse. Yeah, I think I've said a word that could vaguely be right, but not wanting to clarify it to save embarrassment, I move on swiftly, hoping that...
I don't know if you want to say that bit again, but you maybe can't.
I really can't now.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Keep this in or leave the humour for those who are watching it to enjoy. What about yourself, Peter?
Well, to me, one of the joys of being part of a church community is this sense that we are concerned for each other and at a deep level. And you won't be surprised to hear me say that I think in this particular church we are incredibly blessed by the number of people whose gifts of pastoral care are incredible. And the pastoral care team is not the whole, but it is an expression, a big expression of what that means. And part of belonging to a church, for me, enables people to not only look out for each other in some kind of vague way, but be deeply concerned for one another in the way that we know Jesus lived that out throughout his earthly ministry. It's precious, it's important, and it can make a huge difference to the lives of many people.
I think for many it's how when they first, whatever side of the church they come into, that's the first thing they always make comment on is again, like you said, it's the welcome. It's they see Jesus through the care for one another that we show as a church. And again, that's across the board, and I think that's wonderful to see.
But the question does say, what if a member doesn't fulfil? That's what we're sort of looking at here. And I guess that in a gentle way, our responsibility, those who are particularly on the care side of church work, is to stand alongside people we know who are struggling in their discipleship, struggling in the degree to which they feel they can commit to the church. And that can make a difference in many cases.
So then thinking more specifically about this, would you add or take away from the roles and responsibilities there? And again, it's worth emphasising this is your own personal opinion, not necessarily one that you think we have to hold, but one that you personally hold when you look at that.
The one I'd love to hear discussed at a church meeting and hear the views of others is participation at communion.
You were going to say that,
Me too. Yeah, which, I mean, personally for me is very significant. And partly because we don't often talk about this now, but as Baptists, we used to talk about Baptists not having sacraments, but having ordinances of the Lord. In other words, things that from the Gospels we believe that Jesus ordained. And you can correct me if I've got this wrong from my training as a Baptist minister, but we have only two. Baptism, and we've already spoken in the first part about the significance of baptism. But the second one is communion, because Jesus says, "This do in remembrance of me." And Jesus says very little about how we actually operate or worship as a church. But he does say, break bread and share wine, and do that to remember me. So for me personally, that means that because this is something that has been ordained by Jesus, it should be something that is at the heart of our community. And gathering together around bread and wine is that opportunity to, the Iona community put it in a lovely way, we renew our journey with Christ and with one another. And there's a sense in which at every communion service, that's what we're doing. We're telling the story, we're saying we still believe in this story, and we're saying we still want to live out this story. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you think and maybe what the other members think too.
I think from the small group discussion that I lead once a month on Friday afternoons, this actually became something that we talked about at considerable length, and I have a feeling that there are many who are part of our church family already who certainly feel exactly as Simon has said, that we need to put this more front perhaps than we sometimes do. It's not something to be tagged on in the last few minutes of a service. Maybe there's sometimes an occasion for having it in the middle of a service, not just at the end, and that it is opportunities to take part in communion should be at the heart of what we do. We do here have the opportunity, of course, in the afternoon service once a month, also at Brampford. We have introduced the occasional quiet communion as well. So there's more than one opportunity. It's something that should be incumbent on us if we're followers of Jesus. It's
interesting as well. I think because I don't personally hold an incredibly high view of communion. Not that I don't respect it as an ordinance or sacrament, but it's not something that I hold overly highly in my own spiritual journey. Saying that, I really enjoy, one of my favourite communions I participated in was the High Church one I did recently at St James's. I really enjoyed it, and it was the liturgy, the smells. There was a real engagement of senses with it. So I do really enjoy it for myself. I think my question then is how is that accessible to those that would not be here? So maybe, I mean, again, we see it in the Constitution. We hear the passion for it here, and I agree, Peter. I've heard that through conversations with other members. Maybe there's ways that we can do that for Dove Cafe Renew Afresh. Some kind of communion could be included in those acts of worship. It's difficult with Renew Afresh because of the the dynamic that's trying to create and the openness that's trying to create. And we're already actually quite open about our faith, more than some Renew Wellbeing cafes that I'm aware of. So it'd be difficult there, but certainly with Dove Cafe and the prayer in the afternoon, I don't see why there wouldn't be opportunity to offer it. Not least thinking of the power of communion. This is where I'm torn in what I think, because at Open Table, the LGBT friendly service that we do once a month at Southern Hay, one of the reasons we have communion there, and it's ecumenical, so we've obviously got lots of traditions that we bring to it, is because the power it is for someone who feels they've been excluded to receive communion. And there is, you can see when people come for the first time and they haven't had communion in years because they've been told they're not allowed to take it. When they receive it for the first time, they just, I mean, some of them have been incredibly emotional because there is something incredibly powerful. So to contradict everything I've previously said, there is something very powerful in the sacrament. I do acknowledge that. It's just for me personally, it's not. So maybe there's some ways that could be played with.
Yeah, and I'd love us to do that. And I should just say that I am aware too that obviously for some people within our church community, regularly attending communion is actually very difficult for them. And that's often for very legitimate reasons. And so I wouldn't want to make it an absolute.
No. Well, I think, and actually, that's a very good point. You know, are these absolutes? Are we talking about the fact if someone doesn't, attend communion or doesn't come to a Bible study or hasn't participated in worship for a while, that they're out? I mean, obviously, we know the answer is no, but I mean, it is an interesting question when we come to look at these. What are we talking about when it comes to?
Well, there are many people in the church who are aware that part of what we do at our quarterly pastoral care team meetings is consider issues like that in a gentle way, and I think we are getting better at liaising and relating to people for whom this kind of thing is a struggle. And as we said in the earlier session today, there are opportunities to take communion to people who genuinely cannot get to worship, and we do.
The other thing that as I've sort of read these back through that I've been wondering about is in relation to the Holy Habits series that we've been doing, and particularly recently we've been focusing on issues of breaking bread and fellowship, and clearly with those we've been talking the language of loving each other, forgiving each other. Last Sunday I spoke about our kind of vocation for friendship and how friendship should characterize Christian community. And I was just reading this and thinking, I wonder, could you rephrase these so that some of these particulars become more the footnotes, and we rephrase it so that we might say things like, responsibility of church membership is to live in friendship with one another, is to be committed to love one another as Christ loves us, is to serve the world as Christ leads us and with one another. I don't know, other people may say, oh no, those are too vague, but I just wonder if there's other ways of rephrasing these so they kind of feel a bit more positive and reflect more our Christian values.
Could we even use the values that we have as a church?
Divine
reason, maybe that would certainly cover many of those elements. And again, there's a breadth to them that would allow for different. I do appreciate that.
In relation to the question, would we add or take away? I think we've all three reflected already in our own hearts about the issue of church meetings, which are far more numerous here than they are in many other churches these days. I'm not saying that's a bad or a good thing, but it's just where we are. And we have to recognise that, as with so many other Baptist churches, a significant number of the committed members of the church do not come to church meetings either on Zoom or in person, and do not even send apologies for not doing so. And it's obviously an area that we are reflecting on, and we need to look at how, in some way, we can engage people more in this responsibility of making decisions together, which we believe is the way the church should do so.
I want to just offer the opportunity for any last comments, really. I think we could probably go on further. I'm just thinking that, again, this isn't what we're contributing here, isn't what people should believe as such, but opening up of the conversation. So I think we can stop there, having given enough for people to reflect on, unless you have any final comments that you did want to.
The only one I was going to mention was we also have the responsibility here of, wherever possible, are using gifts and abilities to advance the purposes of the church through its activities. And that can sound rather parochial. In some ways I really love it, and I very much want to be a church where we are encouraging everybody to reflect on their gifts and their abilities, and I believe absolutely that everybody has something to bring to the life of the church and to the church's expression of showing love, the love of God to the whole world. I do wonder if it might be helpful to perhaps open up the language a bit more. I suspect these days I'd be more comfortable with talking about not necessarily the purposes of the church, but the purposes of the kingdom of God.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, because we do recognise that some of our folk do great work beyond the walls of this church. They are most certainly serving Christ and his kingdom, but maybe not particularly doing it in activities here. And I want to affirm those as well.
Yes, I agree.
That's very fascinating. So there's talk of, in what you mentioned a few times is, again, the language of this could be changed. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this time. Sorry, please, I didn't offer you the opportunity.
No, absolutely nothing more to say.
No, you sure?
Yep. I don't mean that.
Thank you. Hopefully you enjoyed this time with us. And again, we throw this question out to you. Who can become a member? Please engage these conversations in groups, together as friends, and we will talk about this at our next church members meeting. Again, we're not deciding on things within that meeting, it's just simply a chance to have the conversation. It will be our AGM, so this will come as our extra business that we do a bit later, so the conversation won't be as long as we might have allowed time for previously. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon at our next members meeting.